Welcome to Sachs Realty's Tuesday Night Podcast, where we talk about anything and everything real estate. Each week, we deliver expert information enabling you to make better informed decisions while keeping more money in your pocket. If you're interested in real estate, this is your show. Hey guys, good evening and welcome to another Tuesday Night Podcast. We are live tonight and we are going to talk about investing in real estate and how to set up those businesses, whether you should buy it in your own name, buy the properties in an LLC, whichever entity you decide with your team. We're going to talk about that tonight. Tonight, we have a real estate attorney who also sets up business structures and things like that. Her name is Tiffany Weber. She's coming from North Carolina tonight. And I know you see there's a disclaimer running across the screen.
Gotta have it.
Licensed. That's right. She's only licensed in North Carolina. I'm a real estate broker here in Maryland. Guys, we're going to dive right in tonight. Tiffany, welcome to our show.
Thank you so much. I loved the intro. It's so snazzy.
It's kind of upbeat, right?
It really is. Yeah. Got me excited.
All right. Well, cool. Well, hopefully it gets everybody else excited too.
Yeah, I think so.
Hey, tell everybody a little bit about you.
Well, like you said, I'm Tiffany Weber. I'm a North Carolina real estate attorney. I've been practicing for 6 years, so I do kind of a little bit of everything related to real estate except taxes. I mean, nobody really likes taxes except for the tax attorneys and CPAs. So I focus my practice on anything that really helps people buy and sell real estate. So that includes doing the closing, setting up the entities, figuring out, trying to help people figure out the best business structure to buy these properties in. So live in Lake Norman, which is a really lovely place to live, especially during the pandemic. We saw all kinds of people moving here. If I didn't do a closing from California a day, especially during like the early part of the pandemic, I thought something was wrong. So a lot of people moving to where I live because it's just beautiful and nice place to live. So I've got a husband, got a golden doodle, 35 weeks pregnant with my first child. So a lot going on.
Yeah. Well, I have to ask, you decided to go to law school, obviously. Why did you decide to go into the real estate side of things?
Well, it just kind of happened, to be honest with you. I came out of law school and I began my practice as a litigation attorney. And a lot of my cases tended to be focused on real estate. And the guy that I ended up being law partners with before he passed away last year, I really just started helping him on accident. I was an associate, so I would kind of bop around the office asking the other partners, hey, you got anything I can help with? And I just kind of took a liking to real estate. Then he wanted to go on vacation to Egypt for 2 weeks and didn't have anybody to do closings. So I said, I'll help you. And then I never left. So that was several years ago now, and really haven't looked back.
So I don't know how different things are in North Carolina compared to other states, and Maryland included in that. But I guess one of the things I want to talk about first, so that the audience has because they may not be in North Carolina. When we're talking about the different types of business entities that you can set up, is there sort of like an overall rule federally that when we're talking about these things tonight that kind of apply no matter where you live?
I'm not sure if there's, the tax law, of course. So how these entities are going to be taxed is regulated federally, but then of course your state has specific tax laws that you have to follow. As far as how the entities operate, that's going to be more state specific, especially with limited liability companies, because every state has their own limited liability company act. For example, like North Carolina, LLCs can own LLCs and be members of LLCs. Well, there's other states where LLCs cannot be members of LLCs. So how they're taxed on a federal level is going to be uniform, but then how they're taxed, of course, on a state level and how they're regulated by the state is going to differ based on that state's act.
So a lot of the information that we're going to talk about is going to be generalized. So whether you're, looking to flip properties or long-term rentals, whether they're residential or commercial, we're going to go over some of these types of entities and some of the reasons why people create these entities and some of the protections that it may offer. But certainly check with your own state check with
Mhm.
your own attorney. There's a team of people, we're going to talk about that also tonight, that you should have on board, like your
Mhm.
accountant, your insurance agent, things like that. But that's kind of, I want to break it down a little bit, because I know that I deal with a lot of people that buy, and some of them, they're first time buyers of investment properties, and they put properties in their personal name. And a lot of the reason why they do that is for borrowing money.
Mhm.
Sometimes people even say that they're going to live there, um, and
That's
they
where the
may,
real estate attorney covers their ears and says,
yeah,
"No,
I
no,
mean,
no."
so they may be intending to live there, but who knows? But we
Yeah.
want to talk about, why, what really constitutes um, a commercial loan. So we get a
Mhm.
lot of people, they're buying property and maybe they're getting a residential loan on it. Um, but even though it's a property up to 4 units in one dwelling, it may still be considered residential. But all
Mhm.
of my investing that I do, if I'm borrowing money, is on a commercial loan, not a residential loan. So even if it's a residential property, up to four properties, still classified residential, but it's still a commercial loan in the eyes of the bank, because I'm not living there. I'm a non-owner
Mhm.
occupant, and it's
Right.
something that I do for a living. And a lot of times, if you're buying it from, in your personal name, a lot of times, even though you've disclosed you're not going to live there, um, they may not lend to an LLC. So we'll talk about some of
Mhm.
that too. But let's just talk about some of these types of businesses. And Tiffany, maybe you can just kind of give us an overview of,
Yeah.
what they are. And, because people listening, they may not have any idea. So
Sure.
let's just kind of put some of those
How
up
about we
here.
stick with like the C Corp and the LLC? And of course, I'll talk about the S Corp, but I think a lot of people get confused thinking that that's like an entity that you file. In North
Okay.
Carolina, you don't go and file an S Corp, you file a C Corp or an LLC, and then you make that tax election. So
Okay.
most people, I think, if they're investing in real estate, are probably looking at the C Corp or an LLC. There
Okay.
are other different types of entities, and those can vary by state, but these are kind of your two big boys, I would say.
Well, let's talk
Uh,
about the C Corp.
yeah. Yeah. So C Corp, those people that are owners of C Corps, those are shareholders. And a C Corp doesn't have any limit on the number of shareholders. You can, I mean, truly, limit does not exist. And you can have different classes of stock. And that matters because different classes of stock can have different voting rights. And, voting rights matter because that controls what happens with the corporation. Now, the corporations are managed by a board of directors. So, like in an LLC, that's managed by either a member or a manager who may not be a member. But in a C Corp, it's a board of directors that's doing the management and the day to day decisions, deciding the direction of the company. Now, those are elected people. So if you don't like your board, then they can be voted out. Thinking about the organizational documents. When you file a C Corp, you're filing articles of incorporation. You're having bylaws. You're going to have a shareholder agreement. You're going to have corporate resolutions. You'll have to have regular meetings. And then taxation, you're going to be taxed. And I'm not going to get super into the tax stuff because, like I said, not a tax attorney, but generally speaking, you're taxed at the corporate level. And then whenever the shareholders get paid, they get taxed individually as well. So on their income that they receive. So that's
So
kind
it's
of
a
just
double
the,
tax.
yep.
I mean, I have a C Corp. One of my businesses is a C Corp. And look, guys, I'm not an attorney. I'm not an
Are
accountant.
you
I'm a
doing
business
short term
owner.
stuff in that? Is
No,
that like for, okay.
no, that's actually an operating business, a business that, a construction company that, um, but I know with the C Corp, I question it. I've been in business for 32 years. I've questioned, it seems like every time tax time comes around, I'm like, why am I a C Corp again? I mean, what is the, you know, and, because if you want your money out of it in your pocket, out of the business in your pocket, I pay tax on it from a corporate level. And then if I
Mhm.
want it in my pocket, I'm taxed again on those, after taxed.
Yeah.
Well, it depends on how I do it. If it's a salary or something like that, then
Yeah.
it's obviously, but if I want more than that at the end of the year, then I'm double taxed.
Hmm.
But I don't have shareholders and things like that. So when we're talking about C Corp, do you recommend that people buy real estate in a C Corp?
I think it depends on what they're doing. And most of that, for me, when it comes down to what I'm helping someone decide what to do, I want to know, what's your plan? You're going to be flipping stuff? Are you going to be holding this long term? Is this a vacation rental? There's a lot I want to know about what they're going to be doing with the property. So usually the question or the approach is not, okay, let's figure out your entity and then go buy the property. It's no, what are you going to do? And then let's figure out your entity. So C Corps can be a little better for short term stuff, but it can also be good in like your construction company case. But it's all comes down to like, what does your accountant really say about how you are going to get paid? Um, what's your tax rate going to be compared to in an LLC? And is that going to be better or worse for you? So C Corp, I think, can be really good for holding property, but it does depend on what's your purpose.
So taking a step back, when someone comes to you and they say, hey, I'm interested in buying real estate, investing in real estate, can you kind of just take us down, like you were starting to do, kind of what are some of the questions that you're asking? What are some of the conversations that you're having?
Well, one I already mentioned, what's the type of property that you're wanting to acquire? Also, do you need to borrow money to buy the property or do you have the cash? Do you have partners that you're buying this with? And if so, are some of them going to be very involved in managing and some of them not? Those are probably the top things that I want to know. And then I want to know, how many do they already have other investment properties? Are they planning to get more investment properties? Do they even know yet? If they don't know, then sometimes it can be hard to strategize based on that. But if a client comes to me and says, I'm buying up every lake house that I can that allows a vacation rental, and I'm starting a vacation rental business, then that guides me a different place than I'm just starting out. I want to buy a single family residential home and I want to rent to one family and I'm going to keep it for 30 years. That's different. So those are the types of things I want to know.
So how about if they say, I'm just starting out and I want to get into residential rentals?
Mm-hmm. Usually those are longer term holdings. So your accountant's probably going to tell you all these things about depreciation and how good that is for you. So usually those types of people end up with an LLC just because it's a little bit less formal on the structure, a little bit easier to administer. So as long as their accountant is cool with it, then a lot of times I'm telling people an LLC would probably be a good fit. And then if their accountant says they need to be taxed as an S Corp, that's something you can do after the fact for either a C Corp or an LLC.
What about when they want, so I know here in Maryland, we have to pay an annual fee just to have a company, just have a company name to be able to, buy within. You have to keep it in good standing. Costs $300 per company, LLC, corporation, whatever it is. It can get very expensive. I have a lot of LLCs. So every April, I'm writing checks to the state of Maryland to keep them active. What do you tell people as far as if they're going to invest in multiple rentals? Kind of what is your thought on should they set up an LLC for each property? Should they put multiple properties in one LLC? What's your advice? What do you tell your clients on that?
The two things I like to think about when it comes to, do you need an entity for each one of the properties that you're going to own? It comes down to me for risk tolerance and administrative tolerance, because like in Maryland and North Carolina, you're paying an administrative fee every year for every entity you have. Now you're filing those annual reports. And if you don't do it, you're going to get administratively dissolved. And then your company's not going to be active. And to reactivate it, then you're paying the reactivation fee plus any of your old annual fees that you forgot about and all of your old reports. So if you're not a good administrator, then the more entities you have to administrate, the harder it is going to be for you to keep up with those things and stay in compliance. But then you also have to balance, are you a risk tolerant person or not? Because the whole purpose of having the entity is to shield you from personal liability. And for example, if you have, I think about my law partner that passed away, he had 60 rentals and they were not all in the same entity, but he was a pretty risk tolerant person. So he would have, 20, 25 rental properties in the same entity because he'd gotten to a point where he said, if I get sued in this one entity and they get a judgment against me, like I'm not that worried about it. I think the types of properties that I am, long-term rentals for single families. It's not vacation rental. It's not a commercial property. There's not any inherently dangerous activities going on. So he didn't care. But I know people, I've got clients that are very risk intolerant. So they create an entity for every single property they're going to own. And that's because if they get sued and get a judgment against them, then, and by them, I mean the entity. So if you own a rental property, your tenant sues you and they win and get a judgment, then the judgment can only be used against the assets of the LLC. So if that's only one property and you own 10, and those other 10 or other 9 are in different LLCs, they're protected. So I think you have to balance those things, weighing what's the type of property that I'm going to have. Is it inherently dangerous? Like I think a vacation rental on Lake Norman is a little bit more dangerous than your run-of-the-mill everyday rental property. A commercial property, like all of the trampoline parks around here. If you're operating a trampoline park and you've got you own the building that's located in, you might be joined in a lawsuit. Well, maybe you don't want to own all your other properties in that same entity. So risk tolerance and administrative tolerance are kind of the two things that I'm thinking about there.
So I think about, and I like your, thoughts on the types of lawsuits that, where the risk is higher. I think about insurance.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of think about two things. One, what's the available, I guess, profit in the asset. So if you're mortgaged to the hilt on the thing, or all your properties in your portfolio, and there's very little left at that point. So there are some, people think about taking out all of their equity in a property. So if you're that type of investor, or whether you like to keep it down, I guess that falls back on how, risk adverse you are.
Mm-hmm.
But what about the insurance? So what are some of the things that, my insurance agent always says, look, the best way to protect yourself in rental properties or any type of real estate, commercial real estate, where you're inviting the public in, it could be a slip and fall, it could be whatever, is to have plenty of insurance to make sure that, and then, my agent always advises me to have umbrella policies, take it from there. Are there situations that you can think of as a real estate investor? I'm thinking, well, I just need a good insurance policy. Are there situations that you can think of where the insurance didn't cover the investor or the property owner?
Well, I think it depends on the policy. So I can't think of something in recent memory where the insurance didn't step in and cover, but that doesn't mean that doesn't happen. So there are always exclusions to policies. And especially if there's some issue of, intentional misconduct on the part of the investor, you're going to have a hard time getting someone to cover some wrongful act that you did. So hopefully if you as an investor buying property, you're not doing something intentionally wrongfully, because you're going to have a hard time getting coverage for that. I think having the policy, especially the umbrella policy, having plenty of insurance is a no-brainer. If you're not going to do that, then maybe you ought to reconsider investing in real estate, because you could watch your whole investment go down the drain. Protect yourself.
I know I can think in Maryland here, lead paint is something that we deal with, pre-78 properties. If there's a lead paint claim, I have several consultants here locally that say, that now you can't hide behind any type of corporate veil if you're, sued for lead paint claims. So when they kind of switched that around quite some time ago. A lot of investors said, you know what, I don't want to have these properties anymore, or I would never
Too
buy
risky.
anything. It's too risky. That's pre-78 or that isn't registered lead free. What about as far as, are there things that, we talk about insurance? Are there legal aspects where a corporate veil could be pierced to where even though you have the separate entity, is it the same kind of your same kind of thought process with insurance that if you're, when would you be at risk for corporate veil being pierced?
Well, when it comes to piercing the corporate veil, at least in North Carolina, you can get yourself into hot water when you're not observing corporate formalities. I think about a case that I litigated where the person that we were up against, he essentially used the company like his personal piggy bank, and then tried to do this maneuver where he was a member of an entity and that entity was going down. And so he was trying to save himself. So he formed this other entity and bought the note that him and all of his partners owed. And then he tried to collect on the note against his other partners. But because he was using essentially that new entity that he formed as his personal piggy bank, he was not really treating it like a company. Then we were able to argue, hey, that's just him. You can't have a note, you can't enforce a note against yourself. So we were able to get that entity disregarded, like he never even filed it. So those are some things like, if you got a company card, you're not using it to get your dog groomed. You got to be careful. You got to observe the formalities of a company. You can't treat it like your bank account. So I think that's the biggest one that I see people run into issues with. They'll get an investment property and they're starting to collect rent from their tenant. Well, they want a new pair of shoes or whatever it may be. So they write themselves a check, or they just use that bank account that's the one that they set up for their investment property to buy their tennis shoes. Don't do that. That's really, if you get sued, then all of that information is going to be coming out in discovery. And I promise you, the attorney on the other side is going to say, well, not only are we coming after your entity and what your entity owns, but you no longer have your liability shield. We're coming after all you got. So that's your personal home, everything.
That's a good point, because there was no separation from that, entity to your personal expenses. You were just writing checks, and I guess it could depend on how you would code them, from your company, whether you're coding it as a reimbursement or whether you were expensing it. But that's interesting. So they saw in that situation where the owner of the LLC was also using that same account for buying personal things. And they said, well, you're one and the same. You're really not an LLC at all. You're a personal entity. Why is it that banks shy away from lending to LLCs? So I know even a lot of commercial banks now, that are doing non-owner occupied types of financing, unless it's the business that's going into the building, as an owner occupant. The banks shy away. A lot of banks are no longer doing LLCs. My question is, I don't understand, if you're personally guaranteeing the note anyway, what's it matter? Any idea why lenders are shying away from that?
The few that I've talked to about this issue that are willing to talk about it, they talk about fears that the LLC is going to be under collateral, or their loan will be under collateralized because the LLC doesn't have enough assets. But especially in the instance of a brand new one that you just formed for the purpose of, say you're one of those risk intolerant people, every property you buy, you're forming a new LLC. Well, that LLC doesn't have any history. It doesn't have any other assets. So one, you're probably not getting out of that without signing a personal guarantee. But the lender there's no history. So they don't really know what they're getting into unless you've got a great relationship with your bank and, they know all of your financial details. But a lot of these lenders are thinking, gosh, this is a brand new, unproven entity. They don't own anything other than this property that we're lending against. We're getting a personal guarantee. So of course, that makes them happier, but that's kind of what is making a lot of them nervous.
Do you have clients that are buying properties in their personal name and then transferring them later into an
Mhm.
LLC? And if they have mortgages on them in their personal name, what happens in that situation?
Depending on the lender could say, we got to be paid back because a lot of notes, especially if you're buying in your personal name, then you're likely able to get one of those traditionally like conventional loans or residential loans. And those notes, at least in our state, say on transfer, we got to be paid back. So there are exceptions where you can get your lender to approve that transfer without them calling the note and saying, all right, you got to pay us now or we're going to foreclose on the deed of trust because you transferred ownership. But that's one of the things that I wish anytime I can catch someone before this happens, I say, what are you going to do with it after the fact? Because if you close on it in your personal name now, your conventional loan could potentially be called, so to speak, or you got to pay it back the second you put it in your LLC if you don't get permission. So that's a conversation you got to have with your lender when you want to transfer property into your entity's name.
Are you familiar with any of the Freddie Mac and investor loan programs that are out there? You can have like up to I think 10
Is it 10?
properties in your personal name, and the properties can be up to it's actually a fantastic program. I mean, it's
Yeah, I don't know all the details. I know a little bit, so I'd love to hear more.
A lot of times when people are buying investment properties, they don't realize when they're getting a commercial loan, there's kind of two different things, right? There's how long is the loan? Is there a balloon payment at some point? And most of the time, the answer is yes. When you're doing commercial loans. So you have what's called an amortization schedule, right? So it's amortized over a period of years, which is where you pay a portion of your principal and your interest. Well, like a lot of my loans are amortized over 25 years, but they're only a 5-year loan.
5-year balloon, right?
So it's a balloon payment in 5 years. So where, yes, I'm paying a payment that it would appear to be a 25-year loan. They stretch that balance over a 25-year period with interest, but then at 60 months, boom, it's due or you have to refinance. So you're really only locked in a lot of times with the rate for that 5-year period. Sometimes, depending on how good of a borrower you are, whether you have a good track record and whether the lender is receptive to it, you can lock in for longer, maybe 10 years. But kind of that's the longest I've seen in a commercial loan.
I don't see much longer than 10 in commercial.
Yeah.
I'm with you.
Yeah. But this federal program with this investor loan program, you can have up to 10 properties. I think it's amortized and the loan is a 30-year note and the interest rate's fixed. And you can have, if you really do it right, I mean, you can buy up to a 4-unit dwelling. So with 10 loans up to 4 units, you could have 40 doors in this program per borrower. But you have to put it in your personal name. So I hear, and I don't have any experience with anyone changing it out, but I hear lenders say, well, don't worry about it. Just put it in your name and then you can switch it to an LLC afterwards. Are you familiar with how they do that?
Well, how should I say this? I have seen many lenders myself tell borrowers, just do what you're going to do after the fact. That doesn't mean I still don't have to tell those borrowers the risk of doing it because the note and the deed of trust, they say what they say. So if the lender has the ability to call the note or say there's a due on transfer clause that if you transfer the property, you got to pay us back. It's there. It says what it says. Now, your lender might tell you they don't really care what you do after closing. But again, that's a risk tolerance thing. So I'm going to have to tell you as a client of mine, all right, I understand what you're trying to do, and these are the benefits of having this property in an LLC, but you need to know what your lender can now do. So I've heard the same things. I'm not going to give a definitive answer either way, but that's what I would tell a client if they came to me and said, yeah, I just closed on one of these, and the lender said they don't care. I want to go ahead and put it in my LLC's name. Now, the mechanism to do that is pretty simple. You just deed it from yourself to your entity. You're going to want to talk to your accountant about any tax implications of that before it's done. But the actual instrument, that's not hard. It's just knowing all the things that could potentially be wrong or could go wrong, or that you might find yourself in a little bit of trouble with after the fact if you do it knowing what the note and deed of trust say.
There's just thinking about some of the things that we're saying. When we're talking about notes and things like that, what do you tell people, your clients, when they're paying cash for a property? If you're, and they're that asset now has no note, they paid cash for it. I hear a lot of attorneys say, if you're going to do that, kind of lend the money to your entity, put some kind of a note on the property so that it isn't just this liquid asset sitting there for liability reasons.
Yeah, I think what they're trying to accomplish is maybe a little bit of judgment proofing there. So yes, having a judgment against the property, the lien priority goes kind of in order of what was filed. So you've got a deed of trust on the property that's got to be paid off. Well, and you also then you get a judgment later in time, then the creditors to be paid back. They kind of have to go in order. So I think that's more towards judgment proofing. And then potentially maybe there are tax reasons that I'm not sure of. But in my attorney brain, I'm thinking, all right, if you get a judgment against you, how do we make it so you're less likely to have to pay it? Which, if you're a plaintiff, you're not happy with me saying that, but it's just the reality of trying to prevent losing too much money.
So let's talk about people buying properties for their own company, their own business. I've been doing commercial real estate for quite some time. And, I deal with a lot of investors that are buying property to rent to either residential or commercial tenants. But I see very few businesses buying property and renting to themselves. And when we're talking about my experiences from borrowing money, I find it so much easier to borrow money if I have a company and I want to buy an asset to put my company's office in there. The banks really, to me, they show favor for something like that. They give me better terms because they're looking at my business's financials as paying, really supporting the mortgage. And then there's opportunities at that point to rent additional space to collect more passive income on those properties. But I hear businesses a lot of times, especially big businesses, and maybe this is more of a tax question, but from a from a legal standpoint, is there a reason why these businesses aren't taking advantage more of purchasing the property that they're occupying instead of renting?
Well, I think it really comes down to, two things. One, the liability shield, but also, like, for example, my building, my accountant said, well, let's reduce your taxable income by having you pay rent to this other entity that you own. So there's strategies there that you talk to your accountant about. But for example, I own a law firm. So if my law firm gets sued, well, I would much rather limit my exposure to the assets of the law firm. So if you keep adding assets to that, well, now we're looking at the building that we're in that's now potentially going to have a judgment levied against it, or vice versa. I think that's probably the main reason why, in the attorney brain, why I would say, your operating company, let's maybe not have that operating company own the building that you're sitting in, just to have a little bit of separation so that if something goes south and one of those companies gets sued and gets a judgment against it, it's not affecting, like, for example, the operating company, it's not affecting your day-to-day business. You're still going to be able to run, and then you can have a little bit of breathing room to figure out the other situation without having your operating company's assets affected.
How about borrowing or, getting other investors to buy into properties? You want to buy a piece of property. You don't have all the money. what type of entity would be best for collecting investors and having them give you money?
Well, I think it depends on the level of involvement of the investors. And then do you want flexibility in allocating profits and losses? Because there are some, like, for example, in an S Corp, if you file that S Corp election, you've got one class of stock. So whenever you've got any distributions, they're on a pro rata basis. There's not really any flexibility there. But like in an LLC, you could have some flexibility of, okay, this person's going to be paid out 50%, 30%, 20%, whatever. That can all be structured in the operating agreement. You can really, with any of the entity types, set forth the responsibilities of the different investors. But I think it depends on, are these investors just for money, and do they have any say in how you make decisions? Or, all right, say this person put up 80% of the money, but they didn't do any of the work. Are you going to have to pay them 80% once you sell? How are we accounting for the sweat equity? So there's a lot of different things that play into deciding, all right, if I've got to bring in other people, which entity is going to account for the way we need to run our business day to day?
And that brings up a good point. That would be some type of operating agreement that you would, so
in an LLC.
In an LLC, or what would it be in like an S Corp? I mean, would there be just
an
bylaws?
S Corp, a C Corp, it would be like bylaws and a shareholder agreement. S Corp depends on whether you elected that out of a C Corp or an LLC. So LLC would be operating agreement. Corporation would be, your bylaws and your shareholder agreement. And then the S Corp, of course, just goes either way depending on which entity you originally filed it as. But like in your operating agreement for an LLC, you could have a member who put in a bunch of money, but they don't have really any say in the management or day-to-day operations of the company. That's where you're going to spell that out. And if you don't, then if things ever go sideways, then you're going to have to go to a court to let the court decide, okay, well, should they have had a say, or should they not have? How much money should they be paid out of the profits here? Because you didn't have any of this in writing. So it's super important, especially if you're going to end up needing to borrow money. Banks won't lend to you if you don't have an operating agreement. You're not going to be able to open up a bank account. Well, most banks won't let you open up a bank account without the operating agreement or some sort of formal written document saying these are the owners, these are our responsibilities, etc.
I have a question here, and then I want to get back to some of the steps that someone would take in setting up or coming to you and asking these questions and sort of establishing it when they're deciding how they want to raise money. I want to get back to that on the how to bring partners in and have people invest. So here, Layla, we appreciate you tuning in. How would you recommend a family who wants to purchase, buy, and hold properties set up their entities?
So I think that depends a little bit on, when you say family, is that like a nuclear family, like husband and wife, or we got extended family in there? I've got a client who's got like a very complicated investment fund that I'm not going to get into that because it's so incredibly complicated, but he manages the money for probably like 30 of his family members. And then they use that fund to then buy rental properties. So I think it matters a little bit on what do we mean by family. But if we're saying, like, for example, my husband and I, we have Weber Family LLC that we use to buy our rental homes. And that's, we use that for long-term holdings because our accountant said, hey, we want to be able to depreciate these over the 27 and a half or whatever years. They just made more sense for us tax-wise. But if you're trying to flip the property, that makes a little bit of difference too. It sounds like from the question, this is like more long-term investment. So if it's like a husband or if it's spouses that are trying to buy properties together, then an LLC could really be a good way to go for that. Again, risk tolerance is going to help you decide whether you need one for every property or if you can hold a couple together, and add administrative tolerance. But just for my own personal life, I've got an LLC that holds my rental property that's kind of a long term. We're going to keep this thing for 15 years or however long.
So, and I guess, so I've had people come to me and say, um, you know, just like Layla is suggesting here, if you're setting up a corporation, you have a family entity that wants to buy together. I would say, what is everyone's role?
Mm-hmm.
I'm always, first of all, I'm the first to say that the only ship that sinks, in my opinion, is a partnership.
Mm.
I don't even like partnerships outside of, like what you just described, Tiffany, of like a, husband and wife and that kind of thing, because sometimes family can be as difficult to get along with as anybody else. And what I see happening when people have businesses is I always see where somebody says that they did more work than the other one. And of course, none of this happens when it first starts. It's like walking
Mm-mm.
down the altar, together, you're going down the aisle and everybody loves each other and they're excited and we're going to make a lot of money. And then what happens is somebody does more than the other one. Somebody puts in
Mm.
more than the other one. But
Or
here's the
perceives
biggest,
that they did. Maybe they
right?
didn't. I don't know.
Yep. Yep. But here's the big thing. How are you capitalizing and funding the deal? Because what happens is when you're running a business, even a real estate investment business, is you need more money a lot of times. So what
Mm.
happens is I see a family will get together and they'll go in and they'll buy a piece of property. And then they didn't realize that the property needs capital repairs or improvements. It needs a
Mhm.
new roof. The roof's going to cost $20,000. They go, well, I don't have it.
Yeah.
Well, then what?
And they
Who's going to
probably
put up
didn't
the
have an
money?
operating agreement that
Yeah.
said we can make capital calls anytime we need to, and you either pony up or you're out.
Or you're out.
So
Right.
yeah, and
Yeah.
the thing is, people don't realize you can set all that stuff up first. You don't have to wait until something is going sideways to figure it out. So a policy I have in my own life is let's have the tough conversations up front, because if you sort out before you get down the aisle, then whenever inevitably the hard situation comes up, you have already made the plan for how you're going to deal with it. So when the roof needs to be replaced, because it's going to at some point and probably much faster than you expected, then everybody knew from the beginning. We all signed this operating agreement that said capital calls can be made. So if we don't have the ability to fund these capital calls, then we maybe should walk away, or we're not the right people to be part of this. I've seen a lot of these things go sideways for exactly what you're talking about, especially with family.
And that's what I really want to kind of get back to. And Layla, we hope that answers your question. If not, if you want to go ahead and
It
comment on
was a
something
very
else.
attorney answer. It depends. I've been
Yeah,
trying not to
right.
say it depends, but it
Right.
really does depend on so much more than just.
Yeah.
Uh, there's a lot of information that's needed there.
I sit down with buyers all the time on the investment side of things. They're like, well, I want to do this, and everybody wants to pitch in, and we want to buy this together, and it's going to be great, and we're going to make lots of money, and we're going to grow this thing. And exactly like I said, then I ask the questions, what's going to happen when you need more money? And they're like, well, what do you mean? We're not
What
going
more
to need
money?
more money. It's going to be, um, so getting back to the conversation about when someone comes in and they say, hey, look, I want to do what Layla's suggesting here. I want to have a family and friends. I want to have a partnership. I want to do something together because I don't have all the money myself. And I always say that, people say, do you want a joint venture on this together? And I always go, okay, why is it that, that you're asking me to JV,
Mhm.
or if I need a JV, I got to think about what's the purpose here?
Yeah.
Because if you can do it yourself, do it yourself.
Oh my gosh, this is music to my ears. I don't know if you saw my bullet points, but I said, don't have a partner if you don't need one. And the person who taught me that, interestingly, is my late law partner. And he taught me that before we were partners. So when he asked me to be his law partner, it was probably the greatest honor of my life, because he lived by it. Don't have a partner if you don't need one. So I had to ask him, why do you need me? So it comes down to money or skill set. So if there's no other way you can get the funding, and you for some reason have to do this project, or it's just completely an opportunity you cannot pass up. Okay. Or maybe you've got the money, but you don't have the skills and you don't have a way to get them in the time frame needed. Those are really kind of my personal rules. Uh, I'm not going to consider having a partner unless I really, really need one of those two things. But if I can avoid it, I'm not going to have a partner because there's too many headaches that come along with it and too many potential disruptions and disputes that just come with that package. Now, I know plenty of people that have successful partnerships. I'm not saying it can't be done, but I tend to agree with you. I got to really interrogate within myself, why do I need a partner? And if so, why?
And what you said is a perfect reason for it. If you actually can combine with someone that has as much value to add as you do, or I'll tell you another time when I see that it works really well, or when two people, neither, none of the partners, it could be more than two people, but none of them are going to directly work in the business.
Mm,
They're managing the business. They're stepping outside of the circle and they're looking at their business, in the circle, and there's, employees and managers or project managers in the case of real estate, or you're
mhm,
hiring a general contractor to build something. And maybe it's just like a short-term partnership or something like that, where I see where, several people get together, they have the means, they all put money in, they have the ability to put more money in if it's necessary, up, obviously to a certain amount, depending on what the project is, but they can fund it. And, and they're managing it. They're getting together every so often to run it as a, kind of like a external
mhm.
team. I
Yeah.
think that I've seen work very well. But when someone's in swinging the hammer or pushing the broom and the other one's out on the golf course or at the office saying, I don't have time for it, that's tough.
Yeah, it is. And the situation you described, I've seen that work too. And I think part of in all of those situations where it's worked well, they had all of those things nailed down before the first check was written. They'd had the tough conversations. They know, all right, person A, your job is this, and you're responsible for these things. And person B and person C, you've got this is what we have to hold each other accountable to, and these are our roles. And if you don't do those things, that's exactly where you run into the I've been out on this job site 5 days a week or more, depending on what's going on, and I haven't seen you in a month. That's where it can really go south. And those people didn't have those conversations, nor did they nail down the responsibilities ahead of time. Now, I shouldn't say in every case. Sometimes they did, and somebody just doesn't hold up their end of the bargain. But guess what? You can put in your organizational documents what happens if someone doesn't hold up their end of the bargain.
And we're going to talk about that. And I had a situation where you're referring to, I have clients of mine, and one of them, was sort of just like this. They said, well, I'm out there every day, I'm doing the work. They didn't do anything. And I said, but, and I'm trying to kind of be the mediator, between the
Mm,
two. And I'm going, but
super
they
fun.
they put up all the money. You wouldn't have had it
Mhm.
if they hadn't have put up all the money. But people forget, guys. I mean,
Yeah.
people forget. Human nature is we spoil easy, we spoil fast. When you're in the middle and you're trying to make a deal happen, then you're really want to make it happen. So you're willing to not hit on those important topics or subjects
Mhm. Or
that you.
ignore red flags.
Yeah,
There's all kinds
exactly.
of
You're just passing by. You're like, nah, I just want to do it, and this is going to work,
Mhm.
and I know it will, and then that's what happens. So, Tiffany, tell us this story. Kind of somebody comes into your office, and you've touched on it a little bit, but kind of dive in. What should people be thinking about if they're going to set up a business for buying a rental property, for instance? And maybe
Mhm.
Layla, this is kind of what they're thinking about doing. What um, what should they be gathering ahead of time? What
Mhm.
are some of the thoughts they should be having? When should they start reaching out to an attorney? And should they all come in together? Should the primary partner or the one that's putting it all together, is that kind of like a
Mhm.
private conversation initially? Like,
Yeah,
What do you
I would
what do you
say,
suggest?
in my practice, I tend to have kind of the ringleader is the one who initiates the conversation. I'll just call him the ringleader for lack of a better term. But when to involve an attorney, attorneys can be expensive. So if you're just sitting around watching TV and think, I think I might want to buy an investment property, maybe it's too soon to call the attorney the next day because you're going to get charged by the hour in some cases for something you're not sure you want to do. So maybe once you've given it a little bit more thought and you've actually have some semblance of maybe a business plan or like this is how much money I have to put towards it. This is who I want to be involved or not be involved. That's a good time to bring the attorney in because then you can start figuring out your structure. I would want to know, especially if it's a group of family or a lot of times, especially around the lake where I live, you'll see two couples get together and buy a property that they're going to use as a vacation rental. But what they never talked about is who's going to be in charge of running the Airbnb or the VRBO site? Who's going to arrange for the cleaning after every time someone vacates the property? What are we going to do about the trash? Is there going to be, basically just the upkeep of the property? Who's in charge of that? So you need to figure out of the people that are involved, who has a daily responsibility or a day-to-day, I should say, responsibility, who is only there for the money. And it's okay to only be there for the money, provided everybody's on board for that. Like if you're putting up the bulk of the money and you don't ever want to have to step foot on the property, if you have that conversation up front, okay, that's fine. I think of clients all the time. They're like, yep, I'll put up proportionately like all of the cash that needs to be done for this deal. But don't call me if the roof is leaking. Don't call me if the toilet breaks. Don't want any part of it. But those conversations are had up front. It's outlined in the operating agreement what the roles and responsibilities are. So those are things that I want to know as the attorney. Okay, who's going to be in charge of making this thing go? Who is just a money person? If you need to get more money, do all the members have it? Are they going to be able to contribute? And if they can't, what do you want to do about that? Do you want the ability to let it slide? Do you want the ability to kick them out and basically purchase their interest from them? So there's a lot that people don't think about whenever they're trying to buy these properties with other people. And they think, oh, well, we'll just figure it out as we go. Well, sometimes that works, but if you can avoid figuring out as you go, you're going to be much more successful in the endeavor.
What about the business plan? Do you help as an attorney? Do you help them to establish the business plan, or is that something that they should just tackle on their own?
I'll weigh in if I'm asked to, just from personal experience of if someone wants to know, hey, with your investment properties, what have you done? What has worked well and what hasn't? I'll try to chime in with just some practical advice. But when it comes to, as the lawyer, I try to stay out of how to run your business. I would much rather have my clients make that decision because if they're bad business people, I don't want them saying, my lawyer told me to do XYZ. I can help you get everything organized, but I can't make you be a good business person. So, I'll weigh in if necessary or if I think I'm not overstepping. But for the most part, I want my clients to be thinking through the business plan on their own or with the help of, maybe they've got a good relationship with their local bank or they've got an advisor that could really help them put together a solid business plan. I try to stay out of that role as much as possible.
What if they come to you and say, here's what I want to do. How do I do it? How do I make it happen?
Oh, yeah.
What if they don't know? I mean, it's so, and I can think about some of the first conversations that I had with my attorney and guys, I mean, if you're listening to this, I want to tell you, no one likes to pay for an attorney.
Attorneys don't like to pay for attorneys. It's true. Nobody.
Nobody wants to pay for an attorney. I mean, sometimes, and look, Tiffany, I'm just saying, I mean, sometimes I think if my attorney just kind of lays in bed at night and thinks about things that and the next thing you know, I get billed.
You got a bill.
Sometimes I feel like the, administrative assistant, I'm getting billed to make the bill. And
that's the fun thing about real estate is we do mostly flat fees. So I'm incentivized to be efficient.
I'm telling you, man, sometimes I'm like, wow, they put this detailed bill together. How much did the actual bill cost me? But kind of all jokes aside, Kind of. But when I think about when, 30 years ago, when I sat down, I was very fortunate that I had an attorney that, I kind of took me under his wing and sort
Mhm.
of showed me, I paid, but really said, okay, look, these are the kinds of things that, you need to be thinking about or focusing
Oh,
on,
yeah.
and this is the way you want to set it up. But what my point is, guys, this is an important part of business. This is, and if you ask, you know, uh, Melissa in my office, she'll tell you. I mean, I will pick up, and Melissa's basically helps me run things in the office. And I can't tell you how many times I say, well, here comes $60 or here comes $150. I mean, because I need to pick up the phone. I need to call the attorney on this one. I need to ask
Mhm.
a question, right? I can't tell you how important it is, because there is a team that you need to build if you're starting any business. And I don't care whether you're buying this in your personal name, if you're landlording or you're buying property that you are not living in, you are a business owner. And
Mhm.
when you're building a business, there is a team that you just cannot be without. One is your attorney. We're talking to Tiffany right here tonight. Another one is an accountant, and another one is your insurance agent. I mean, these are the three
Mhm.
top people. I'm always asking my insurance agent, let's get together again. Let's look at what we have. Let's make sure we're dotting the I's and crossing the T's. I don't want to have a flood in the basement and find out that appliances weren't part of my policy and my water heater leaked and it's an appliance. And,
Mhm.
and then I'm going to get
And
some
even
kind
just
of way.
shopping your rates, like, are you gonna
Yeah.
if you let it go too long and you're not constantly talking to your agent regularly, then
Going
how
back to the underwriter. Hey, this guy's been
Yeah.
with us for 10 years, man. He hasn't had this. He hadn't had, we got to give them a discount here.
Mhm.
But you have to pay for certain things in business. And I'm going to tell you that the biggest thing up front is making sure that you're paying an attorney to help you structure whatever the deal is that you want to do day one.
Mhm.
Um,
Well, if you don't pay him up front, there's a good chance you're gonna pay him when it goes south.
yeah,
So,
that's what my attorney says. You guys all
yeah,
say that. Look, he says, pay
yeah,
me now or pay me later. It's a lot cheaper to
it's
pay me now
true.
than it is to pay me later.
And having come from litigation, I that really informs how I practice real estate law, because I don't think that there really is an attorney on earth who would tell you, I'm going to keep you from ever getting into a lawsuit. It's just not possible. People sue for stupid stuff, whether they've got a reason to or not. It doesn't, just because you get sued doesn't mean that person's right or is going to win. So there's no way to make you litigation proof. But having been in litigation, I know the things that I was having to go after people for, defend people from, and I don't want to expose my clients to those issues. So whenever we're structuring real estate deals, then I'm thinking about, okay, make sure you're not using this thing as your personal piggy bank, okay? Because I personally have defeated people for doing that exact thing. So it's important. You just get your team up front. And it can be painful, but sometimes it takes money to make money. And I would say if you can start with finding one of those people that you really trust, we have networks. So if you find an insurance agent that you really trust and you're like, this is my guy or this is my girl, but you don't know an attorney, you don't know a CPA, ask that person, because if you trust that person, then they probably have a network of people that they trust that believe like they do. Uh, for example, I think about the accountants that I feel comfortable referring to that I know understand real estate, or the CPA, the CPAs and the insurance agents that I know are investor friendly and can break it down so that they understand these things and that they're well protected. So, leverage the network of the people that you know, like, and trust. You don't have to know every single thing off the bat, and being willing to say what you don't know, which is, if you're not an attorney, saying, I don't know what the law is, or if you're not an accountant, I don't know what the tax structure is. It's going to be best. Being willing to say, I don't know these things. Let me go get my team. You're going to set yourself up way better.
And I'm going to tell you too, um, if you guys are listening and you're putting this together, and you want to be a real estate investor, whether you're flipping, whether you're going to be a long-term hold, whether it's residential, commercial, it's not up to you to train and educate your attorney or your accountant. Make certain you're finding somebody that's in the industry that you're in. And if
Mhm.
you want to be, you're starting a portfolio to landlord. Your attorney should have landlords, in their client base. That should be who they serve. I mean, you want to make sure that they are up to speed with those landlord laws and the contracts and things like that. The same with the accountant. If your accountant has nothing to do or doesn't have any clients that own rental properties, chances are, they're going to have to look this stuff up. It's not just coming to mind with them, and they're not going to help you grow.
Right.
They're
And
not going to help you grow.
sometimes the people that got you where you are aren't the people that get you where you're going to go. So
The next step.
sometimes in business, you have to realize, okay, I may love this person as a person, but my business has this other need. I think about my husband in a past life owned a CrossFit gym, and his accountant did everything there was to do. He basically worked with every CrossFit gym owner in the giant radius of where we lived. And, he was wonderful at that thing. And we really couldn't have thought of anyone better. But when we started to get into different businesses, like he doesn't handle my accounting for my law firm. That's not his wheelhouse. And he thankfully is a type of person that would say, that's not my wheelhouse. Let's get you to someone else. It's like when I said at the top of the show, like, I'm not a tax attorney. I'm not going to talk to you about taxes in detail. I'm going to get you to a tax attorney. So that's another hallmark of a person that's going to be good to work with when they tell you, I may not be the best fit for you, or this is what my scope is. I'm really good at this thing, but if we go outside of this, we're going to have to pull in some other people to make sure you're better protected.
So one of the last questions that I have here is, if you have partnerships or people that you're bringing in to help make a deal happen, and, you're setting up these parameters, let's just say it's an S Corp or an LLC, and whether they're shareholders or members, is it a conflict of interest for, should a partner have their own attorney that's separate, or kind of what happens to, because I think about some of the deals that I've been involved with, and where, you're bringing in partners to make a deal happen or raise money, and they're coming with their contract. And then, you're setting up a business entity, and, kind of where are the lines with that? And when does, someone have their own attorney? When does it become a conflict? Any advice on that?
Yeah, so this one's going to be pretty state specific. So when I'm talking about this, I'm very much talking about it from North Carolina perspective. But attorneys have these things called rules of professional conduct, and they've got, the state comes out with all these opinions about, for example, you got two people coming together, they want to form an LLC. When can you jointly represent them, or when can you represent the company? And then when does it become a conflict? So I think about, for example, like my law partner and I, when we're negotiating becoming partners and what's going to be contained in our agreement. We're attorneys, but we each had our own attorney because there's going to be at some point that our interests diverge. That you always hope that you have, you're rowing in the same direction, but there's going to be a point at which there are competing interests. So at any point, if you might have one partner's interest prioritized above another, and they're not equal in any kind of sense, that's when you're going to want to have a separate attorney. Now, certainly best practice would be just go into it, each have your own representation, then you don't have to worry about whoever you have contacted getting into a conflict. Because, for example, if you contact me and everything seems to be going fine and I don't have any rules that prevent me from representing the company, your interests are kind of aligned. Well, if those start to diverge at any point in the process, I got to bail. I got to get out of there because now I have a conflict of interest, and you guys then have to get your own attorneys anyway to finish the job. So sometimes it can be easier to just start that way. It's kind of like, I know we're talking about real estate, but it's like in North Carolina, you can represent a couple and help them prepare their estate plan, their wills. But if they start to have competing interests, or one has an idea of what should happen with this thing and the other one says absolutely not, you can't help both of them. They each have to have their own counsel. So it's a similar concept of, if like the sweetheart wills, if you're rowing in the same direction, then there probably won't be a conflict. But if at any point you start to diverge, there's likely going to be one. So the safest thing, you can never be wrong by having your own attorney from the start. It can be expensive.
Well, guys, we hope that this was somewhat easy to follow. I know it's not a fun topic to talk about, but it is something.
Yeah, it's not fluffy stuff.
Yeah, it's not. It certainly isn't, right. But at the same point in time, I can't tell you how many times I hear these questions come up. How should I buy property? How do I raise money? What do I do with partnerships? Do I need a partner? So hopefully you got some good value from this tonight. And all of Tiffany's information is published in the show notes. She has a YouTube channel. It's amazing. If you'd like to follow her.
Thank you.
Yeah, definitely do so. We encourage you. If you like this video, if you would give it a thumbs up, it would definitely help more people that could learn from this tonight, this topic of entities and real estate investing. That would help us out. So that would be great. Any last minute advice, Tiffany?
I just want to reiterate, don't have a partner if you don't need one.
Hey, remember that. You heard it here. The only ship that sink are partnership. So, Tiffany, thank you so much. You're amazing.
Thank you. Thank you. This was fun.
All right, guys. Until next week, thanks for watching, and we'll see you then.